Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Katie Crane. I'm the Pilates professional. Welcome to another episode of the Pilates Lounge podcast. Before I get started today, I want to really share some gratitude with you. I've been doing the podcast for over 12 months now, and one of the reasons I keep coming back here time and again is because I feel a great sense of dedication and obligation to my profession as a Pilates instructor, as a Pilates educator, as a studio owner, and as a real lover of Pilates and a believer of Pilates. I 110% believe in the power of Pilates. I see the power of Pilates every single day in the work that I do, in the life that I am able to live in my own body, and in the instructors that are coming through as students of my teacher training program. And so really the podcast has always been about giving back. But the longer I do this podcast, sometimes the podcast, has become a platform for my own creativity. So, for example, next month in the city in which I live, I am hosting my city's very first Pilates Expo. And the idea and the inspiration for the expo partly was born thanks to the podcast. And that is partly because I receive so many letters of gratitude from you, from the listeners, letting me know just how important this podcast is. And you know what thrills me to bits is knowing that I'm able to reach people who don't necessarily have access to Pilates workshops, to meeting other peers in the industry, to knowing other studio owners, or even really having their own community yet. I often hear from student instructors who are maybe studying an online course and they're looking for some mentoring, and I often will speak to somebody for an hour on the phone or on Zoom and mentor them through any questions that they've got. So just putting it out there, if you do want some help, if you're looking for advice, if you are feeling unsupported and you want more support, simply reach out. Seriously, I will make time for you. But when I do speak to people, they tell me just how important this podcast is for them. Because, and I don't know why, but it's sometimes we as therapists, as educators, as instructors, as studio owners, we hold our cards very close to our hearts because something in us tells us that we are in competition with other people. But I just don't feel like competing with other people is serving anybody. So instead, I'm always looking for ways to collaborate, which is exactly why I decided to host a Pilates Expo in Northern Australia, something that's never been done before. And it's not going to be massive. It's the first time that I'm doing it. It's a little bit of a trial, but what I've done is invite other Pilates professionals from other studios in my area to be presenters. And I'm a studio owner, so from a business standpoint, maybe that doesn't seem like the best marketing option, but I don't want to be the only person known to teach Pilates where I am. I believe that there's room enough for all of us. But a funny thing did happen. So quite a few people reached out to ask if they could be presenters. And I knocked back a lot of people, partly because I am 100% indebted to my industry, to elevating my profession, to making sure that my industry is recognized as a stand-alone profession. And I realize, and I totally appreciate, and I encourage, a lot of people are utilizing some Pilates concepts. They're even using some of the Pilates equipment to expose more people to Pilates type exercise. But not everything is Pilates. And the whole point of the expo is to maintain a very high standard of what Pilates is. And I think that as a Pilates professional, one very, very important thing that I should be doing, and I encourage all of us to do it, is to be an active member of our Pilates Association. I know that you can become a part of like a fitness association and they're going to have a Pilates under their umbrella. But when we are part of our own association, only then can we really maintain the standard of Pilates that the community are ultimately seeking. I know that reformer exercises are super fun to do on a reformer. I teach reformer. I teach a reformer certification. I understand the importance of making Pilates more accessible to more people, but not by watering that down, not by just throwing away something that has taken so long for us to build. It's taken many, many, many years and a couple of generations for Pilates to be recognized as so powerful in what it is. And I really encourage all of us as Pilates professionals to stand by that. So if you do have a Pilates association where you work, where you live, where you teach, join it. Even if you need to join as a student, because maybe the certification that you initially received was by a school that is not recognized by the PAA. One message that I receive from a lot of people who want to speak to me is like, oh my gosh, I'm either halfway through this certificate or I've completed this certificate and now I've realized that nobody wants to employ me in the Pilates industry. So these people are going to traditional Pilates studios and the owner is saying, sorry, but you are not well certified. You are not certified enough. These students have paid the same amount of money as what a Pilates industry recognized student would pay for their certificate. It's not the money that you're spending. It's that the school that people sometimes choose are not doing the job that they need to be doing to make sure that there is some sort of standardization within our industry to make sure that all students come out at the other end of their certificate being able to teach, not only teach a class, but be able to cater to the needs of their clients within that class from day one. I know that's just a little bit of a rant, but the thing is I've had quite a few people reach out to me in the last month and they're in a complete tizzy. So this is my message to you. If you are becoming certified or if you are certified with a school that is not recognized by your Pilates industry body where you live, it's okay. Use that as a foundation of your learning. And now go and join your alliance or your association or whatever it is called, specifically Pilates, not physio, not fitness, not anything else, specifically your Pilates association where you live, and join them in whatever capacity you can with the certificate that you have. Maybe you have to still be a student. That's okay. Because as somebody who's been teaching for over 18 years, I'm still a student. I will be a student forever. We never graduate from being a student. So be okay with where you're at right now. And then seek further education. Seek education that is going to get you recognized and respected by your peers in our industry. Pilates is a standalone profession, and we need to stand together to make sure that that remains so. With that little rant being said, now I'm going to step into the show. Now, today's episode is all about the polyvagal theory. So what is polyvagal theory? Who coined the term polyvagal theory? Why is it so important, and how does it even relate to us as Pilates professionals? Now, this episode is going to come out before the Australian Pilates Association conference, which is in Sydney in 2025. If you have not yet gotten your ticket, organised to be there for the weekend, definitely check it out, because I will be going partly into this topic in the workshop that I'm presenting at the PAA conference. So maybe this is a little bit of a prelude to the conference workshop. If you can't make it to the conference, then this is for you. Now, Stephen Porges is a psychologist, and he coined the term polyvagal theory. So polyvagal theory really is all about how the vagus nerve, now I've spoken about the vagus nerve in quite a few episodes, so you could scroll back and have a look at vagus nerve, but the polyvagal theory is specifically how the vagus nerve influences our responses to perceived safety and threat, impacting our emotions, our social interactions, and our physical well-being. Polyvagal theory proposes the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, in particular the vagus nerve, is organized into a hierarchy of 3 neural circuits that dictate our responses to the environment. These circuits in order of evolutionary development are the dorsal vagal, we'll go into that, otherwise known as immobilization, the sympathetic or mobilization, and ventral vagal circuits, ventral being recognized as social engagement pathways. That's a lot of words. There's a lot of words right there, isn't there? I know, but stick with me and let's unravel how this theory is actually very, very closely related to the work that we do. Now, first and foremost, I want to recognize that Stephen Porges, as a psychologist, he has coined this a theory. And this is really, really important. And it's actually one of the reasons that I was so drawn to Stephen's work, is that he recognizes that and he's worked on this for many, 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 many years, but he still calls this a theory. This is what we call good science. Good science remains curious. So good science is never settled. And I've probably said this before. If somebody tells you that the science is settled, that you cannot argue with the hypotheses, because all science is based on a hypothesis or an idea. If you can't argue with that, then it is no longer science. So science initially, if we look back on many of the scientific greats, they were in fact, before they were coined scientists, they were philosophers. So science is an idea, a philosophy. And then what happens is we work towards proving whether or not that philosophy is in fact true. Now, I would say that the work on the vagus nerve, on the PNS, the parasympathetic nervous system, ANS, autonomic nervous system, has well and truly been proven. But I do love that this is still known as a theory, because our understanding of humans in general, and the emotion of humans, the brain of humans, the nervous system of humans, we are constantly learning. We are constantly learning because we are so curious. And as we continue to learn, potentially this theory continues to change and evolve as many scientific theories should. So at its core, polyvagal theory really offers us an understanding of how the nervous system responds to cues of safety, danger, and life threat. And of course, a lot of the information or a lot of those cues are coming from our environment. So coming from perceived threats. And remember, I've spoken about this before. A threat or a danger is often perceived. It may not be an actual threat. So it may not be that somebody is actually running after you and going to get you. We have a perception that we are under threat. And having a perception of being under threat or believing that we are under threat is in fact just as powerful as actually being under threat. So those perceived threats can really affect how our emotional response, our physical response, the health of our body in general. So the polyvagal theory really teaches us that the autonomic nervous system, it isn't just about stress or relaxation. Really, it's a dynamic and adaptive system that shapes how we move, breathe, connect, and recover. And I'm going to tell you why this matters. So every single person who walks into your studio isn't just a body. They also are a nervous system. And that nervous system has been shaped by their entire life experiences. And if you spend any time with a client, especially when we get to spend a little bit of one-on-one time with a client, you recognize that everybody really does have a story. And their story, their experiences, what has happened to them in their life, how they feel about what has happened to them in their life, really does shape how they feel in their body. It shapes how they move. It can definitely shape how they breathe, how they connect with the work that we are sharing with them, and ultimately how they recover. And this is why this matters. Understanding the polyvagal theory really gives us a roadmap. So if I understand how the nervous system may respond, how the ANS, the automatic nervous system, the PNS, the parasympathetic nervous system, how they work together and how they respond to each other, how they actually regulate each other. Our nervous system ultimately is always working in opposition to each other, but also cohesively with each other to bring the body back to homeostasis. And when we understand this, then this could give us a roadmap. It can really help us understand what's happening when a client might freeze in the middle of a movement or might disassociate during breath work. Have you ever heard somebody saying, I keep holding my breath. I keep breathing the wrong direction to what you're cueing, or I'm feeling out of breath when I'm trying to do the breath that you're cueing. Or if a client, lo and behold, suddenly bursts into tears when you're doing something with them or when you're explaining something to them and they don't understand why. So when we understand the nervous system, then we can really help meet people where they are, and we can break down the barriers that people have with their own body so that we can actually help them heal. And more importantly, understanding things like the polyvagal theory, it actually helps us become better. It helps us become more compassionate and more attuned as teachers. Because when we understand the nervous system, then we can teach from a place of regulation and not just technique. And quite often, the way that we teach can really help somebody regulate their own nervous system. The other day I was teaching alongside another instructor, and I love to be curious, so while I might be teaching my own people, so in our studio we often share the same room with another instructor. We take up to 4 people in that room, We call it clinical Pilates, but really it's just Pilates using all of the different apparatus. And so we'll be sharing the apparatus. We've got plenty in there, but ultimately we're sharing the same space. And so even though we'll be teaching our own clients, it's quite easy for us to hear the conversations and hear the way that other people are teaching. And in my mind, it's actually a great way for us to learn from each other, which is partly why we do it. But because I have been researching this exact topic lately in preparation for my presentation at the Pilates Association conference in Sydney next month, I guess I'm becoming much more attuned to and more aware of how I am conversing with people and the type of language that I'm using. And so maybe, I guess I'm becoming much more aware with the way that other instructors are also using language. And I noticed that the instructor that I was working alongside wasn't necessarily being dogmatic in their approach, but was always using language that went like this. Okay, so now you're going to put your feet in straps, and then you're going to start to push your feet out in that frog position, and then you're going to do 10 of them, and then you're going to do your circles. And so all of the language was, I am telling you what you're going to do. There was never, and then I want you to consider how that might feel. And then, so this is how I would teach instead. So instead of always saying, and then you're going to do this, and then you're going to do that, and then I want you to do this, and after you've done that, you're going to do this. Instead of using that language that is really just telling somebody what to do, I'm really aware of staying curious, and I stay curious by inviting my client to do something and invite them to explore something. And I also encourage them to be aware about how something makes them feel or how they are responding to something. So I might use language like, how about if we start with you putting your feet in straps? And then once you're ready, pop your heels into your small V and try extending your legs out over towards the foot bar for around about 10 to 15 reps, whatever feels appropriate to you. And then once you've done that, what about if you try leg circles? So this is how they go. You would take your legs up towards the ceiling and see if you can stay nice and heavy in your hips, really feeling what the sensation is to keep your hips down on the carriage as you're going into your circles. Maybe once you've done 10 or 15 in that direction, when it feels appropriate, start going in the other direction and just check in on your body. Are you still maintaining the same shape in your body, or has your body changed shape? And what does it feel like to stay grounded through the pelvis and really focus on maintaining that neutral shape of your body? Do you see how the language that I use is completely different to telling somebody how to do something or what to do? And when it comes to working with people who are in pain, who are feeling stress, who have anxiety, and you know what? Meet me somebody who doesn't have all those things. I want you to consider, is it a different experience for them when I use language of giving them responsibility for handing the experience over to them, and rather than telling them what to do, I am simply facilitating an experience for them. So yes, people are looking for guidance. There's no doubt about it. That's why people come to us, because they perceive us as an expert. And in somebody else's eyes, you could be perceived as an expert just by being one step ahead of them in what you know. Then you are an expert to them. But for them to really understand the work in their body, do you think that they're going to learn Pilates by you just telling them what they have to do all the time? Or are they going to learn Pilates for their body? And everybody's experience is going to be unique, because we are not paper cutouts of each other. We are very, very unique individuals. By expressing the work in a way that allows for them to actually embody the work. This is part of my message is, yes, Pilates is powerful. There's no doubt about it. I see people healing by doing Pilates every single day. I see people healing relationships, people healing their relationship with themselves, people healing their body, people healing their heart. I see so many positive things in my sessions every day. And I'm hoping that this conversation will invite you to help facilitate your people as well. So the whole point is that for us to become better, for us to be more compassionate and really more attuned teachers, understanding polyvagal theory is really a daily tool for every single movement educator who wants to teach in a way that honors the whole person, because Pilates was never designed to be clinical, even though we can work in a clinical setting, absolutely. Pilates was never designed to be a biomechanical model or a clinical model of movement. Joseph Pilates said, Pilates is the complete control, the complete, coordination of the mind, body, and spirit. And like I taught you a little bit about how I'm doing this Pilates Expo, and I had a physiotherapist. She wanted to be a presenter. And I said, look, thanks so much, but all of our presenters are actually active PAA members. Like, this is the whole point of the expo, is that we want to be seen as a standalone profession. But if you want to get involved, by all means, you could come on as a sponsor. You could come and have a table, a stand at the expo, and you could promote yourself. But as far as presenters, I want people who are Pilates educators. And she really got her knickers in a knot. And she was like, you have such a narrow view of what Pilates is. And you talk about, being elevating the industry and helping other people and letting everyone do Pilates. But really, you are just narrowing what Pilates is. No, I'm not. And she went on about how, I'm a physiotherapist, I have a 4-year bachelor degree, everything that I do is very clinical and biomechanical and has studies based on it. And well, that's my whole point. Pilates was never designed to be a biomechanical model. Physiotherapy is a biomechanical model. So physiotherapists can draw from Pilates, and physiotherapists do use some of what Pilates is in their practice, and that's fine. Go ahead, do it. I think that's fantastic that you are drawing from Pilates. But Pilates as a whole is not just clinical or just biomechanical. And this is where understanding things like polyvagal theory actually sets you apart as a Pilates practitioner, as a Pilates educator, and a Pilates professional, because we draw from many different theories, from many different concepts, and we're able to do this as Pilates practitioners because we are not bound by the code of physiotherapy. We are bound by the code of Pilates therapy, and that actually does encompass the mind, body, and spirit, just as Joseph Pilates intended. Now, the polyvagal theory is built around the vagus nerve. Vagus in Latin means meandering or wandering. So the vagus nerve, it wanders or meanders throughout the entire body, and it touches on so many different organs and parts of the body. And what I want you to understand is that the vagus nerve, rather than think of it as, because we call it a vagus nerve, rather than think of it as just one, like if you think of the esophagus, so from the mouth to the anus, pretty much is one single tube, right? But the vagus nerve, it has circuits, that thousands of tiny little entrails that come off of it. So think of the vagus nerve as beginning in the stem of the brain. Actually, it's the 10th cranial nerve, so it's the longest cranium meaning skull, meaning brain. So it's the longest nerve from the brain through the body. So it starts at the brainstem. It travels down through the face, so it touches on, you could do this now if you want, if you bring your fingertips just on the inside of your eyes, right on the edges of your nose, and you put a little bit of pressure, you might get a little bit of tingling through your face. That's vagus nerve. This is the ventral. Ventral vagus nerve is all about social communication. So our face is very much associated with social communication. But if you pop fingertips just on the inside of your eyes and you came down on the outside of your nose, and then from the outside of your nose, you follow around the mouth, vagus nerve touches on the lips, and then go up along the cheekbones to the ears. Vagus nerve innervates, partly is responsible for our hearing. So you could, your ears are almost like a conch shell or a shell. You could follow the shape of your ears. Vagus nerve touches on your ears. Vagus nerve then take your fingertips from the back of your ears and then along your jawline down to your throat. If you're thinking muscles, you could think sternocleidomastoid. Go down through your throat. Vagus nerve touches on your vocal cords, touches on your thyroid, and then goes down into your heart, into your lungs, your diaphragm, your digestive tract, and even more. Vagus nerve touches on every major organ in the body and is partly responsible for your inflammatory response or your response to inflammation. Inflammation is a stress, but here's the kicker. 80% of the information traveling through the vagus nerve goes from the body to the brain. So what does that mean? Well, it means that how we breathe, how we move, and how we orient ourselves in space directly shapes our mental and emotional state. How wild is that? I mean, if that doesn't excite you, then I'm not quite sure how else to excite you. But Pilates is ultimately about homeostasis. Pilates is finding balance. And when we understand where our body is in space, when we are moving well, when we are breathing well, then if our vagus nerve touches on our heart, our lungs, our diaphragm, our entire face, our digestive system, if we are moving well, then ultimately our vagus nerve is regulating all of those things in the body. So Pilates ultimately can be responsible for homeostasis. So really our whole system is constantly scanning the environment through a process called neuroception. So neuroception is like an internal surveillance system that determines whether we're safe, whether we are in danger, or if our life is threatened. And neuroception and neuroceptors are unconsciously affecting everything from our posture to our tone of voice. So let's take an example of an infant. So a baby who doesn't have any language yet. So the baby doesn't have any language, but everybody knows when that baby is in the ventral state. So the ventral vagal state, our communicative state. They're cooing, they're smiling, they make eye contact, and they're reaching for connection. The baby is safe. The baby is socially engaged and regulated. But if something changes, so say a loud noise or a threat to the environment, then a baby may cry or scream or flail. And then that is a sympathetic activation. It's the mobilization of fight or flight. It's our dorsal state. And then if nobody comes, if that stress is not resolved, then they go quiet. The body freezes. They might appear calm, but they've gone into a dorsal vagal shutdown. This is the freeze response. So adults do the same thing, but I guess we just wear fancier clothes when we do it. You know, we've all seen people who are actively socially engaged. They've got a smile on their dial. Their eyes are bright. They're listening to what we're saying. You can see that when they're moving with a sense of calm and a sense of joy. But we've also seen people who come in very rigid and on high alert, and you can see that they struggle to take deep breaths. Maybe they tell you that they've got digestive issues, they've got a sore back, they've got sore neck and shoulders. They're highly alert. And then we've seen people who come in slumped and slouched over, and they struggle to really commit to coming to Pilates, or they just look down and out. You can tell that they don't feel any hope. They feel hopeless and helpless. They're in that dorsal vagal shutdown. So when we understand these kind of understanding this from an evolutionary lens, I suppose, then the vagus nerve doesn't just have one circuit. It has multiple evolutionary branches. And I guess we could think of this like an image of a tree. So the dorsal vagal branch is the oldest, and it's shared with reptiles. So think dorsal fin, right? So it's shared with reptiles, and it's evolved for immobilization and metabolic conservation. So think of when an animal plays dead. So if an animal was attacked by another animal, and that animal then plays dead in the hope that it may actually survive the attack. We all have that, you know. So I remember when I was a child, and I don't remember what happened, but I remember being on my bed and sobbing and really curling myself up into that embryonic state. You know, I was all curled up like a ball and trying to protect myself. I remember feeling like I was protecting myself from the emotions of whatever it was that was happening. That there was no physical threat, but I remember feeling an emotional threat and curling into a ball. And we've all been there, whether it's, you know, when you have a fight with your best friend or with your boyfriend or your husband or whatever. We've all been in that vagal state where we are all huddled up. And then there's the sympathetic nervous system. This came next, right? So our sympathetic nervous system as bipedal beings, as humans, really allowed for mobilization. So it allowed us to fight or flee. And this is much more of a mammalian evolution, right? So and whether or not you believe in evolution, this is all part of the theory. So as we continued with our evolution from a reptilian state to a mammal, we started to be able to hunt, gather, maybe climb trees, walk on 2 feet. So this sympathetic nervous state really is part of that evolution. And then the ventral vagal branch is really the final part of our evolution as humans, it is believed. And this is where we differ from, say, a reptile that doesn't necessarily communicate compared to a human being. We converse, we smile at each other, we make eye contact with each other. We are constantly listening for those communicative cues from other people. We use our voice, we speak to each other. We're not just grunting or barking or growling at each other. We're actually using different tones of our voice to get across what it is that we want to say to people. So this ventral vagal branch, so think our eyes, face, nose, ears, even our heart, our diaphragm, all of the deep front part of our body, this is all helping us to connect with other people. So it's the feelings that we have. So it really is quite unique to our human experience and our engagement as humans. Otherwise known, so the ventral vagal branch is otherwise known as the social engagement system. So social engagement system, that whole ventral part, it includes the muscles of the face, especially around the eyes and the mouth, muscles in the middle ear that tune us into the human voice, and the larynx that controls tone and vocal expression. So our ability to coo, smile, make eye contact, speak with that musical quality in the voice that's soothing, and you will notice. So say the way that we communicate is super important. So let's go back to the baby again. If you don't have a baby, if you've never had a baby, you've probably experienced or seen how parents out in the wild might communicate with a baby, and you'll see that a mother will often have this down regulation, this soothing way of speaking to the baby. That's how mothers communicate to their babies. But then when you see a father communicate to the baby, his voice often will go up a little bit in tone, and that's how because naturally a father would have a deeper voice, and that men are meant to have deeper voices because they are the protectors of the family. But for them to communicate with a baby so that they don't fright the baby, then they'll often elevate their voice a little bit. This is this is how we really rely on our ventral vagal tone to communicate in different situations. So think about when somebody enters the studio and we meet them. We meet them with a warm smile, with that gentle melodic voice, and with an open, attuned body language. It's super important how we communicate with our clients or with our prospective clients is either going to encourage them to stick with us or it's going to repel us. Sometimes I listen a lot to how other instructors teach, and I notice that instructors who are struggling to either maintain their clients, so they're struggling with retention, or they're struggling to build a strong client base, they often either come across as highly stressed, so they don't know how to self-regulate, or they're not very good at making eye contact. They don't come across as very confident. But ultimately, what I notice is clients who come into the Pilates studio are really, they're drawn towards instructors who are grounded. You don't have to be the best instructor in the room, but you have to be the person who makes everybody else feel great. That is your job. So even if you've got to fake it, it's important that you do that, because how you're actually feeling in the class, in the studio, is really is not how you're feeling. If you're feeling anxious or stressed or highly elevated, you're never going to encourage people to come to your classes, really, is what it comes down to. So your tone of voice is really, really important when it comes to encouraging people to come to you. Now, if we think about it, the diaphragm is so important in the nervous system regulation. So the diaphragm is not just a respiratory muscle. It's really a primary player in vagal tone. So when we breathe deeply and slowly, especially through the nose and into the belly, we stimulate the vagus nerve where it passes through the diaphragm, and it helps us shift toward a ventral vagal state. So let me just take a sip of my coffee that's going cold. So if you are an instructor, and I teach this to my student instructors all the time, when you are learning to teach, one of the most important and most powerful things you can do for your own teaching is learn how to breathe well. So you want to be able to breathe in through the nose deeply. Maybe hold that breath for a second or two and breathe out through the mouth deeply. It's also the breath that we're teaching our clients, is this diaphragmatic breathing. And when we breathe, when we really encourage this diaphragmatic breathing, then it can help regulate the vagus nerve. It can help calm the mind, the body, and it can help our people get into a better state so that they can really practice Pilates. Now, before I go any further, remember there can be too much down regulation. So it's not that it's a bad thing to be upregulated. What we want is to be balanced. So upregulation is an amazing experience as well, and it's actually a super important experience. So for example, in our Pilates studio, we might teach jump board as an upregulation. In some of our fitness classes, we might add hand weights as an upregulation. We also offer cold plunges in our studio. Great method of upregulation. When we can upregulate, then we can work with the down regulation to find balance. Now, everybody is going to be different as to what they need. And what our job is as Pilates professionals is to use our powers of observation, of listening, and of conversing with people, of staying curious to figure out what state our client is in and how we can help them better regulate. So, for example, let's think of this for an example. When a squirrel is chased by a fox, it might run at first. So that's sympathetic, that's ANS activation. But if caught, it might suddenly go limp. So then this is the dorsal vagal response. So as a last-ditch evolutionary survival mechanism, we can switch from one part of the circuit to the next. And then ideally the predator loses interest, right? And then the squirrel might then kind of come back online, shake and run away. What we're trying to do in the studio is actually help people self-regulate. So sometimes we do want to be going up. Sometimes we do want to be coming down. We don't always want to be teaching this down regulation. We're trying to strengthen the vagus nerve. And what I mean by strengthen is we want to be able to deal with stress in both directions. Stephen Porges calls it vagal exercise. You may have heard the term vagal toning. Ultimately, it's all about being able to self-regulate under any situation so that then we can find balance. But the whole point of what I'm teaching is that, in Pilates, because movement is so much a big part of this, of the vagus toning, because the vagus nerve does touch on the diaphragm, the heart, regulate all of our social connections, then ultimately the way that we teach, the way that we communicate with people, and the type of class that we are teaching can really help our clients learn how to self-regulate. Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper into parts of the polyvagal theory, or in particular, the social nervous system. So when we talk about social engagement, we're not just talking about being friendly. What I'm talking about is this complex biological system that includes the face, the heart, the breath, and the brainstem all working together to assess safety and foster connection. So this system includes the facial muscles used for expression and eye contact. When we are teaching people, we want them to make eye contact with us. We want to make sure that we're making eye contact with people. We're not staring at them weirdly, but even in a big class situation, I'm consistently and constantly making eye contact with each person in the room throughout the class. This gives our clients a sense of trust. But also we're encouraging our clients, say when we're doing things like rotation, let them know where they want to be looking. So in our studio, we often use directional cues. So might have a wall with pictures on it. We might have a wall with mirrors on it. We might have a wall with windows. And I might say, let's rotate toward the picture wall, or let's rotate towards the window wall, and encourage people to use their facial muscles to be changing where they're looking. We're thinking of muscles of the larynx and pharynx, so this affects our voice tone. we're encouraging our clients to, within the session, give us feedback. When you do that, how does that feel? When you do that, does that feel appropriate for you? What about if you do that? Do you feel more or less balanced? Get them to give you feedback. So having conversation can be really, really important when it comes to helping people self-regulate. Thinking of the middle ear muscles that tune into human vocal cords and prosody. So not only the way that we are conversing with people, the tone of voice that we're using with people, but also being very aware and considerate. If you are a studio that chooses to use music, what is the tone of the music in the background? Now, studies have shown that there is definitely a type of music that encourages learning. So the brain and the body respond to types of music. I would say that if you're playing really high tempo music that has a lot of lyrics to it, then people are probably more involved in the music than what they are involved in the learning process or in what their body is actually doing. Compared to if you're playing instrumental calming music that doesn't necessarily take away from the work that you're doing in the studio, then people are going to be having much more involvement in their body and mind. So just be really aware of how loud the music is. We tend to play music as a background, and our conversation is what is more involving. Music is in the background. What type of lighting do you have in the studio? Is the lighting super bright or is it flashing lights? Be very aware of the entire experience that people are having in the studio. This is going to either help people regulate themselves, or it's going to send people into a sympathetic state or a dorsal state. You want to help them regulate. And then, of course, the diaphragm. So diaphragm regulates our breathing. Different types of breathing can either bring the vagus state into an up state or a down state. So into a ventral state into a dorsal state or into a sympathetic state. So this is why something like a warm smile or soft eyes, gentle tone of voice, and a deep breath aren't just nice. They're regulating. So this is especially crucial when we're working with trauma survivors, people who may have spent years scanning for danger and who may not really know what it's like to feel safe. So our role as movement educators is not just to teach Pilates. This is a model. It's to model the nervous system safely through your tone, through the way that you teach breath, through the body language, and through pacing. So now that we've kind of explored the vagus nerve, the autonomic ladder, and how we as movement educators can work with these states, let's have a little bit of a talk about how this could all translate into trauma-informed teaching. So the nervous system may or may not have an ability to return to a state of safety. And this is how we see in so many clients, not just pain or tightness or stress, but a system that has not been able to discharge the survival energy that got stuck, right? So this is where co-regulation becomes absolutely essential. And it's something that you as a Pilates professional could really play an integral and powerful role in. So co-regulation is the biological mammalian process of calming the nervous system in connection with another safe, regulated person. Because human beings, part of how we operate is in a tribal situation. We are tribal beings. We are community beings. We are meant to be with other people. And I don't know about you, but I notice in the studio, a lot of people come to Pilates and it is a very big part of their social engagement. it is something that they look forward to. They get to know the other people that are coming at the same time as them. Sometimes they end up going for coffee. They end up having, even if it's just for that 50 minutes or an hour, however long you work with your people, you see people recognize each other. They start to say hello to each other. All of this social engagement, this connection is super important. And it's one of the reasons that I was so vocal when we had those shutdowns. I know that it's a few years ago now, but people are still traumatized by being locked in their house for whatever reason that we were told. But it was completely ludicrous when that whole COVID era was all about health and safety, but it actually had such a poor time for people. People got sicker than ever as far as their emotional regulation. So if we think about this, we are communicative beings. We are tribal beings. So the co-regulation is very much about connecting with other people. Now, this should happen in infancy. It doesn't for everybody. It's very, very sad when it doesn't. But this part of the development of our vagus toning or our ventral vagus toning, the social side, it should start to happen in infancy. So think of in the early years of life, infants really don't regulate themselves. They learn how to regulate themselves through their caregiver. So how the caregiver responds to situations, to stress, the mother's voice, her touch, her breath, and her facial expressions help the baby develop, which was also why I was so against masks back in those times. Can you imagine? I remember listening to a podcast and the discussion was about mothers who are wearing masks in front of their babies at a time when the baby should have been developing through facial recognition. It's such an important part of baby's development so that then they can regulate themselves in stressful situations as they get older. Now, of course, this doesn't end in infancy, but it begins in infancy. So we actually co-regulate throughout our entire life. And as Pilates teachers, we are really in a profound position to support that, not by fixing it, not by over-functioning, but by holding a steady, kind, regulated presence that helps other people's nervous system begin to settle. So when a client walks in dysregulated, they're rushing, they're defensive, they're all checked out, it's tempting to match that energy. Or sometimes if I'm teaching like a class, not in my clinical setting, but in a class setting, and there's a racehorse, I call them a racehorse in the class, and everybody starts to follow the racehorse. You see that happen in a class. It's important for us to bring the class back into the correct tempo that we want the class to be going. Never let that person who's the fastest person in the class take over the class. They will probably benefit from you slowing the class down again. You're facilitating the regulation in the class. So, and it's not like a fake calmness. So you have to be authentic in your ability to anchor the class. So that means that we breathe deeper. That means that our voice may lower a little bit. We start to speak from our belly rather than from our throat. We slow our pacing and we really stay in tune with the cues of the people that we're teaching. So the state of you as a teacher really becomes the intervention. It's not our perfect cueing that is key. It's not the flashy exercises that are key. It is your presence that is key. And this is what really makes Pilates different in the hands of a trauma-informed educator. So being part of that trauma-informed lens is very much about choice. Trauma is often a story of powerlessness, of victimhood, where a person's body or boundaries were not respected. So in the studio, we become guardians of consent. And that's what I mean when I was talking about at the start of the podcast, and I was sharing with you how I was noticing that this instructor was telling people what to do. So it's very important that we are inviting people to do something, to ask somebody if they're ready for something, to express our teaching in a way that hands over the responsibility to the client, not always teaching in a dogmatic way. And it's not like that. When I was listening to this instructor, they're a super beautiful person. They're very considerate and they are somebody who is wanting to serve people. It's just that they have not learnt yet. They're a relatively new instructor and they just haven't quite learnt how to use language in a way that does actually open the space for the client rather than just telling them what to do. So we're always asking before we're offering tactile cues. Of course, that's a given, right? Is it okay if I get my hands on you? Are you happy for me to help you with my hands? And also offering alternative movement options so that clients can choose. So in a class, I might say something like, so I'm thinking we're going to pop your heels on the bar, but if it's not comfortable on your heels, then just pop your feet into the most comfortable position for you. And then even though it might not be exactly where I want them, then say they're not on their heels, they're on their arches. So maybe they'll do a few pushing the bar out with their arches, and then I'll say, and now what happens when you bring your heels onto the bar and you push out? Does that feel okay for you? Most of the time they're going to say, yeah, that's fine. They just didn't realize at the time. But I'm not being dogmatic about the approach. I'm using words and using language so that they can choose, and I'm really guiding the person to the exercise that is what I want them to be doing, but I'm figuring out with them, I'm giving them leeway so that I can really learn where they are at and what is right for them. And I'm always encouraging autonomy. So I might say after that one, this is the next option. So maybe we're advancing an option. So maybe from doing bridge on the reformer, then we're doing single leg bridge. It's an option. So I say, if that feels okay for you, how about if you try bringing one foot off of the bar, and could you do that with one foot? If you're not ready for that, that's okay. Stick with both feet. This is what we're working towards. And also celebrating rest as an activation. Sometimes people come into class, and whether it's in a clinic or in a class situation, and they have this perception that they're only going to be benefiting if they're moving all the time. And there's a very fine line, because there's also nothing worse than listening to an instructor use about 100 words before they even get the client moving. You want the client moving, but you're also giving them permission to rest for a moment, to take them some time out, to listen to their own body, to set themselves up, to take a couple of deep breaths. So you're not actively preventing somebody from moving, but you're always inviting that opportunity to slow down, to rest when they need to ultimately listen to their own body. And that really comes down to watching how we speak. Our language shapes perception. So trauma-informed cueing really avoids triggering and shaming language, and instead of squeeze your glutes, you might say, feel your glutes wrapping around. So instead of don't arch your back, you could say, what happens when you do this? Could you lengthen the spine as you move? You know, so it's choosing ways to speak that is positive reinforcement, positive communication. And I promise you, this subtle shift in words really creates a huge shift in how people feel. It builds trust, it builds self-awareness, and it builds safety. And when somebody feels safe in your presence, this is when the healing can happen. You know, our studios really can become sanctuaries, not by having perfect aesthetics, not by having, you know, the best looking instructors or the most beautiful instructors in the world, not by everybody looking perfect, but by having nervous system literacy embedded in the culture of your studio. And this is really what elevates our work. It's not performance, not perfection, but presence. So when we embrace the wisdom of the polyvagal lens, when we stop seeing movement as just biomechanics, and we start seeing it as biology in context, we can really start to weave in what Joseph Pilates talked about as the spirit of Pilates. I believe this is what he was alluding to. Maybe he didn't use these words. Maybe polyvagal theory was not yet being spoken about. It wasn't being accepted in so many circles, but I'm sure that when Joseph Pilates talks about the mind and the spirit of the work, what he is talking about very much is nervous system regulation, which we now understand as polyvagal toning. So every reformer spring, every breath cue, every hand placement becomes an opportunity to send a message of safety or not. Every movement can really be medicine. It is offered with respect for the nervous system. And I want you to remember that healing is a journey from protection to connection. Healing is not seen through a biomechanical lens. There is nothing that proves that moving in a certain, moving your limb in a certain way or strengthening a certain muscle is what actually heals the body. Pilates really is one of the few modalities that can facilitate that shift. We can gently, consistently, and through good relationships, not just offer exercise, we are offering experiences that help people feel safe in their bodies again. And I believe that this is the true future of Pilates, is when we integrate so many different modalities. We understand the anatomy, we understand biomechanics, we understand psychology, we understand vagal toning, we understand the spirit of movement, we integrate even ideas from yoga, just as Joseph Pilates did, because a lot of the breath work that we could be teaching in our class actually is pranayama, is the different breath work in yoga. And what we want to do is really honor the history of Pilates. Let's expand on the physiology a little bit deeper. So the polyvagal theory integrates the broader models like the neuro-visceral integration model, the biological behavioral model, and resonance frequency breathing theory. And these all reinforce the idea that the heart rate variability, HRV, and vagal tone are core to our adaptability and resilience. So what is HRV? HRV really is our heart rate variability is, say you've got a really fast heart rate, your variability is how long it takes you to slow down. Or if you've got a very slow heart rate, how many heartbeats it takes to get to your full heart rate, right? So when you have good heart rate variability, which is associated with good vagal tone, your ability to deal with stress, then you have a stronger immune function, you have reduced inflammation, you have decreased anxiety and depression systems, and improved cardiovascular and endocrine health. So we can really train this capacity, just like we train muscles, through conscious breathing, through gratitude, through rhythmic movement, through flowing movement. We could even introduce some humming into our training. And our humming really is, we hum with our diaphragmatic breathing. Take a deep breath in. So that type of breathing, that humming, if you want to try it, do it with me again. Take a deep breath in. Hold it, and then hum. You can feel that, can't you? You can feel how that It brings you down. It regulates you. It makes you feel calm, right? So, you want to be integrating all of these things into your teaching. So, that's a lot of information, isn't it? And I know that I go all over the place in this information as well. But I want you to understand that all of these things matter. Understanding something like polyvagal theory a little bit more, integrating polyvagal theory into your work, understanding how breath is so important. The inhale is the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. The exhale is the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. This is not just about mindfulness. We're thinking of using the breath, using rhythm, regulating the biological processes of the body. The physiological sigh. How good does that feel? Take a deep sigh in, 2 breaths, and a deep sigh out. Also really helps regulate. When we breathe consciously, when we encourage this rhythmic response to the movement that we're doing, when we're full-bodied in our exhalations, when we pause at the bottom of a breath, we are teaching the body that we are safe. We are creating a space for healing to happen. And this is why why the work that you do in the studio is so powerful. You're not just cueing breath, you're helping somebody build a resilient vagal tank. You are toning your client's inner world. You are changing their perception to their environment simply by adding conscious breathing into their session. So this is how I would love for you to integrate this conversation into the work that you're doing. Observe the tone of the space in which you work. How do you greet your clients? What does your voice, your body, and the energy that you have communicate to your people? Watch for autonomic cues. Does your client have a collapsed posture? A collapsed posture may indicate that they are feeling hopeless and helpless. Do they have rapid breathing? Are they looking anxious? Do they have a blank expression? These are not just bad form. They're not just postural things that you're trying to recreate or to help people fix. They're actually giving you feedback. So do you need to bring the class up? Do you need to take the class down? How can you help regulate somebody? If somebody is looking hopeless and out of sorts and they don't have any inspiration, maybe the movement is going to help elevate them. If they're looking way up and way stressed out, maybe a jump board class isn't what they need. Maybe they need to down-regulate a little bit. Maybe you could encourage them to flow through some breath work a little bit more. Help them regulate their vagus tone. Be attuned to the way that you're cueing. Rather than being forceful, be curious. Invite people to try things. Rather than being dogmatic in your approach, use more breath, more rhythm, and offer choices, offer options. Teach from your own regulation. If you are dysregulated, if you are highly strung out, highly stressed, if you are feeling like you need to on edge all the time, then so are your sessions. So if somebody comes to you with feedback and you're taking that like defensively, if you're feeling defensive all the time, then you need to work on yourself. Is your nervous system regulated? Because your own nervous system is your very first teaching tool. And always prioritize relationships over performance. This work that we do as Pilates professionals is so much more than choreography. It's really about consciousness. So next time you step into the studio, ask yourself, how can I help this person feel just a little bit more safe in their body today? Not perfect, not fixed, just safe enough to breathe, to move, and to connect. Because this is where the healing begins. This is where autonomy returns. This is where the magic of Pilates lives. Thank you so much for joining me today. If this has resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you're ready to dive into the nervous system and really understand nervous regulation informed teaching, then I would love to see you at the PAA conference in September this year, 2025. I'll be teaching more about this class and actually inviting you to move through some poses that are going to help you self-regulate your vagus nerve and really help you integrate this polyvagal theory into your own teaching in the studio, which would just be a game changer for so many people. My name's Katie Crane. I am the Pilates professional. Thanks so much for joining me. I will be speaking to you soon on the next episode of the Pilates Lounge podcast. Goodbye for now.